We had been watching the enemy for nearly 3 hours when everything changed. One of them suddenly stopped, raised his binoculars, and looked straight at us. Seconds later, automatic gunfire ripped through the building. But what terrified me most wasn't the ambush. It was realizing we had never been the real target. It had been exactly 1 week since that operation. 7 days doesn't sound like much, but in a combat zone, a week can feel like an entire lifetime. New missions replace old ones. New intelligence replaces yesterday's reports. People stop talking about what happened because there's always another operation waiting. My name is Sergeant Taylor. I still remember that morning as clearly as if it happened yesterday. The sun had barely started climbing above the horizon, already turning the dust hanging over Fallujah into a glowing orange haze. Even before 0600, the heat was building. I sat outside our temporary operations building, field stripping my rifle for what felt like the 100th time that deployment. None of us had slept much. After the events of the previous week, headquarters had increased our operational tempo. Every patrol, every convoy escort, every raid carried the expectation that something bigger was developing. "Taylor, briefing in 10, Staff Sergeant Harris called as he walked past with a cup of coffee that looked stronger than motor oil. I nodded without looking up. Inside the briefing room, a satellite image of Al Karma filled the screen. Every man in that room knew the area well. We had driven those roads more times than I could count. Our intelligence officer pointed toward an abandoned water treatment facility on the northern edge of the district. "We received new human intelligence late last night," he said. "Possible insurgent command activity. Surveillance picked up movement after dark on 3 separate occasions." The building immediately caught my attention. Just a week earlier, we'd passed it during another operation. It looked completely abandoned. Broken windows, rusted pipes, collapsed concrete walls. Nothing about it suggested anyone had been using it. Apparently, we had been wrong. "Thermal imagery shows vehicles arriving only after sunset," the officer continued. "No daytime activity. Whoever's operating there knows exactly how to avoid detection." The mission sounded simple enough. We would establish an observation post before sunset, monitor the compound, identify any high-value personnel, and call in the assault force only if the intelligence proved accurate. No direct engagement, no unnecessary firefight. At least, that was the plan. Around 1700, we rolled out of the forward operating base. Our convoy moved slowly through the damaged streets outside Fallujah. Most civilians barely looked at us anymore. Years of conflict had made military vehicles just another part of daily life. I sat in the back of the armored vehicle, watching the streets through a narrow ballistic window. Something didn't feel right. Combat teaches you to respect instincts, not because they're magic, but because your brain often notices patterns before you're consciously aware of them. Nobody else seemed concerned. The radio traffic was calm. Visibility was good. Everything looked routine. That alone made me uneasy. We reached our observation position without incident. An abandoned 2-story house overlooked the water treatment facility from roughly 300 meters away. From the second floor, we had an almost perfect view through broken concrete walls. We settled in. Rifles were positioned. Optics came out. Nobody spoke louder than a whisper. For nearly 2 hours, nothing happened. The sun disappeared behind the horizon, and darkness slowly swallowed the city. Then, just after 2030, headlights appeared in the distance. One pickup truck, then another, then a third. At first, everything matched the intelligence report. But then something changed. Every vehicle stopped about 100 meters short of the facility. No one drove inside. Instead, groups of men climbed out and continued on foot. Our sniper adjusted his spotting scope. "That's strange." I stayed behind my binoculars. One thermal signature became 5. 5 became 12, then 20. More kept arriving from different directions. This wasn't a meeting. This was something much larger. One man suddenly knelt beside the roadside. A second joined him. Then another. I increased the magnification as far as it would go. For several seconds, I couldn't understand what I was seeing. Then it hit me. They weren't unloading supplies. They were planting explosives. Not around the compound. Along the exact road where an American logistics convoy was scheduled to pass before sunrise. For a few seconds, nobody said a word. I pressed my headset tighter against my ear. Falcon 1, this is Overwatch. Be advised, we have multiple personnel placing objects along Route Copper. Possible IED emplacement. Repeat, possible IED emplacement. The radio remained silent for what felt like forever. Finally, headquarters answered. Overwatch, confirm visual. I looked through my binoculars again. There is no doubt. We count at least 20 personnel. Several are digging while others provide security. The response came immediately. Convoy has been halted. Continue observation. Do not compromise your position. That was easier said than done. Every instinct in my body wanted to move. We knew what those explosives would do. We'd all seen the aftermath of roadside bombs, burned out vehicles, torn armor, friends loaded onto helicopters. Watching someone prepare an ambush without stopping them goes against everything inside a soldier. But orders were orders. We stayed hidden. Over the next 20 minutes, more vehicles arrived. By now, we counted nearly 30 enemy fighters. Some carried rifles. Others unloaded long cylindrical objects that looked disturbingly familiar. Our explosives specialist leaned toward me. Mortar tubes. I felt my stomach tighten. This wasn't simply an IED attack. They intended to hit the convoy with roadside bombs first, and then trap the survivors under mortar fire. Whoever planned this knew exactly what they were doing. I grabbed the radio again. Falcon 1, enemy strength has increased significantly. We assess this is a coordinated complex ambush. This time, headquarters didn't hesitate. Stand by. Less than a minute later, another voice came over the net. It belonged to the battalion commander himself. Sergeant Taylor, maintain eyes on target. Quick reaction force is launching now. Estimated arrival, 23 minutes. 23 minutes. I checked my watch. The insurgents were working fast, too fast. One of them suddenly pointed toward the road leading into the village. A motorcycle approached. The rider stopped beside the group and began speaking rapidly. Almost instantly, everything changed. The men abandoned what they were doing. Several picked up their equipment. Others began moving toward the buildings surrounding the water station. They know something, Harris whispered. I don't think they know about us, I replied. They know their timeline just changed. Within 2 minutes, the entire area transformed. Sandbags appeared from hidden storage pits. Heavy machine guns were carried onto rooftops. 2 men dragged camouflage netting over what looked like a recoilless rifle. This wasn't a temporary meeting place. It had been prepared long before we arrived. Our sniper slowly exhaled. This place is a fortress. Then something caught my attention through the thermal optic. A single figure walked out of the main building. Unlike everyone else, he wasn't carrying a weapon. He wore dark civilian clothing. The others immediately gathered around him. Nobody interrupted him. Nobody questioned him. Whoever he was giving orders. I zoomed in as far as I could. The image wasn't clear enough to identify his face. But his body language told me everything. This was the man everyone answered to. I keyed my radio. Falcon 1. Possible high-value individual on site. There was a pause. Then the battalion commander answered personally. Can you confirm identity? Negative. But every armed individual is taking instructions from him. Another few seconds passed. Then came the order. Do not lose visual. At exactly that moment, one of the insurgents stopped walking. He turned. Slowly. Directly toward our building. Even from 300 meters away, I could feel something change. He raised a pair of binoculars and looked straight at us. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. For nearly 5 seconds, he remained perfectly still. Then he lowered the binoculars and started pointing toward our position. The moment he pointed in our direction, every conversation inside our observation post stopped. No one had to say it out loud. We'd been spotted. "Movement," our sniper whispered. I stayed behind my binoculars. The man spoke to two fighters standing beside him. They immediately disappeared behind one of the concrete buildings. Seconds later, another group moved toward the eastern side of the compound. "They're maneuvering," Harris said quietly. "They're trying to identify where we are." I grabbed the radio. "Falcon 1, Overwatch. We've likely been compromised." The answer came back almost instantly. "Can you confirm?" "Negative confirmation, but multiple enemy elements are moving toward our sector." There was only a brief pause. "Quick reaction force is 12 minutes out." 12 minutes. In combat, 12 minutes can feel like 12 hours. I looked around the room. There were only 6 of us inside the abandoned building. Our mission had never been to fight. We carried enough ammunition to defend ourselves if necessary, but not to hold off 30 heavily armed insurgents. Outside, the compound became strangely quiet. That worried me more than gunfire. Experienced fighters rarely charge straight into an unknown position. They preferred to surround it first. Our radio operator suddenly looked up. "I've lost 2 thermal signatures." "What do you mean?" "They're gone." He scanned the display again. They disappeared. I moved beside him. The thermal feed still showed most of the enemy clustered around the water treatment facility. But 2 signatures had vanished. No vehicles. No heat. Nothing. "They're using the drainage ditch," I said. Everyone looked at me. The ditch ran almost the entire distance between the compound and our building. Most of it was hidden beneath collapsed concrete and thick vegetation. From above, it looked empty. On foot, it provided perfect concealment. "They're coming," nobody argued. We immediately shifted positions inside the building. Our sniper covered the main road. Harris watched the rear entrance. I moved toward a broken window overlooking the ditch. The silence became unbearable. Then, a small piece of loose concrete rolled down the embankment, barely noticeable. But it wasn't caused by the wind. Someone was climbing. I raised my rifle slowly. Nothing. Another 30 seconds passed. Then I saw it. A hand. Just for a fraction of a second, someone was pulling himself up the edge of the ditch. I clicked my safety off. The man disappeared again. "They're close," I whispered. Nobody answered. Every rifle inside the room was already aimed toward the same spot. Another minute passed. Sweat rolled into my eyes despite the cool night air. Then the first head appeared above the broken concrete wall. He wasn't looking toward us. He was scanning the windows, trying to locate exactly where we were positioned. I could now see the radio antenna sticking out of his backpack. Scout. He was marking our position for the rest of the force. I transmitted one final message. "Falcon 1. Enemy reconnaissance element is within 50 meters. The battalion commander answered immediately. "QRF is 6 minutes away." 6 minutes. Still too long. The scout suddenly froze. For one brief moment, our eyes met. Neither of us moved. He knew. I knew. There wasn't going to be another warning. He reached for the radio clipped to his vest. At the exact same moment, I squeezed the trigger. The suppressed rifle cracked once. The scout disappeared backward into the ditch. Less than 2 seconds later, the night exploded. Automatic rifle fire erupted from 3 different directions. Rounds slammed into the walls of the abandoned building, sending chunks of concrete flying across the room. "They've got us!" Harris shouted. The observation mission was over. Now it was simply a fight to stay alive until the quick reaction force could reach us. The first burst of gunfire shattered every window on the second floor. Glass sprayed across the room as rounds punched through the concrete walls around us. Dust filled the air almost instantly. "Contact front!" Harris yelled. Our sniper answered with 2 carefully aimed shots before shifting to another window. "They're moving left!" I crawled behind a collapsed section of wall and looked through my optic. At least 8 fighters had broken away from the compound. Some were firing while others continued pushing through the drainage ditch, using it as cover. This wasn't a random attack. It was coordinated. "They're trying to pin us down," I said over the radio. "QRF is 5 minutes out," headquarters replied. 5 minutes. Again, it sounded close. In reality, it felt impossibly far away. Another burst struck the wall inches above my head. Concrete fragments rained onto my helmet. "They've got a PKM!" someone shouted. The heavier machine gun immediately made itself known. Unlike the scattered rifle fire, the PKM hammered our position with long, controlled bursts. Every time one of us tried to move between windows, the machine gun opened up. "They know exactly where we are." Harris leaned beside me. "If they keep that gun firing, they'll box us in." He was right. The abandoned building that had looked like perfect cover 2 hours earlier was now becoming a trap. Our sniper suddenly spoke. "I've got movement on the roof." I shifted my scope upward. 2 silhouettes appeared against the skyline. One carried what looked like a tube over his shoulder. My heart sank. RPG. The warning barely left my mouth before the launcher fired. The rocket crossed the darkness in less than a second. The explosion hit the opposite side of the building, collapsing half the upper wall. The blast wave threw me backward across the floor. For several seconds, all I could hear was a high-pitched ringing. Someone was shouting. I couldn't understand the words. Dust turned everything gray. I forced myself back onto one knee. "Harris!" "I'm good." "Our sniper?" A cough answered from the other side of the room. "I'm still here." Everyone was alive. Barely. The second floor, however, wasn't. A massive section of the roof had collapsed, leaving moonlight pouring through broken concrete. Our observation post was no longer defensible. "They're going to hit us again," Harris said. He didn't need to explain. Once insurgents found success with an RPG, they rarely stopped at one. I switched frequencies. "Falcon 1, Overwatch. Go." "Our position is compromised. Building has taken RPG damage." There was a brief pause. Then the commander asked the question I already knew was coming. "Can you relocate?" I looked toward the staircase. Half of it had collapsed. The rear exit was covered by enemy fire. The front overlooked open ground. "No," I answered honestly. "We're pinned." Another explosion shook the building. This one landed outside, throwing dirt and debris through the broken windows. Mortars. "They're walking rounds closer," Harris muttered. That confirmed our worst fear. The roadside explosives had never been their only weapon. They had planned overlapping fields of fire, machine guns, rockets, and indirect fire. Someone had spent weeks preparing this ambush. Then, through the constant gunfire, another sound reached us. It was faint at first. A distant mechanical roar. I looked toward the southern horizon. Headlights, multiple vehicles, not civilian. Armored. The quick reaction force. "They're here," our radio operator said, unable to hide the relief in his voice. But before anyone could celebrate, our sniper lowered his rifle. "They see them too." I followed his line of sight. Every insurgent who had been attacking us suddenly stopped advancing. Instead, they began moving back toward the water treatment facility. Fast. Too fast. "They're withdrawing," Harris said. I shook my head. "No." I watched several men disappear behind the main building while others sprinted toward concealed fighting positions. "They're not running." I felt my pulse quicken. They're preparing for the next fight. And this time, their target wasn't us anymore. The lead vehicle of the quick reaction force came over the ridgeline faster than I expected. Even from our damaged position, I could recognize the silhouette of the armored MRAPs cutting through the darkness, their infrared headlights barely visible through my night vision. "They're 2 minutes out," headquarters confirmed over the radio. Normally, that would have been enough. But the enemy had adapted. "They're moving to the road," Harris shouted. I shifted my optic toward Route Copper. The insurgents were abandoning their firing positions around our building. Instead, Small teams sprinted back toward the roadside where they had spent nearly an hour planting explosives. My stomach dropped. They're waiting for the QRF. The realization hit everyone at the same time. We had never been the primary objective. We had been the bait. By attacking our observation post, they forced headquarters to launch a rescue force along the exact route they had already prepared. I keyed my radio before anyone else could speak. Falcon 1, break! Break! Enemy IED belt is still active. Stop the convoy immediately. Silence, then static. For a second, I thought we'd lost communications. Finally, the battalion commander answered. Say again, Overwatch. The road is wired. Do not continue. I repeat, do not continue. Several agonizing seconds passed. Then another voice broke onto the net. Lead vehicle stopping. Every man inside our building exhaled. But the danger wasn't over. The convoy had stopped less than 400 meters from the first explosive. Close enough. The insurgents reacted instantly. One fighter sprinted toward a pile of broken concrete near the roadside and disappeared behind it. Our explosives specialist cursed. Command wire. I spotted it a second later. A thin cable, almost invisible under the dust, stretched from the roadside toward the insurgents' position. They're going to detonate manually. The distance was too great for anyone on the ground to reach him. The convoy couldn't move forward. Backing up would take time. Too much time. Harris, I see him. Our sniper was already adjusting his rifle. The problem wasn't the shot, it was the range, just over 500 meters. In daylight, it would have been difficult. At night, through dust and heat distortion, it bordered on impossible. The insurgent crouched behind the concrete slab. One hand rested on what looked like a military battery. The other gripped two exposed wires. If he connected them, the entire lead section of the road would disappear. Wind, Harris asked. 3 miles per hour, left to right. He nodded almost imperceptibly. Nobody else spoke. Even the radio fell silent. The only sounds were distant gunfire and the low rumble of armored engines waiting for permission to move. The insurgent leaned forward. He looked directly toward the stopped convoy, waiting, probably expecting the vehicles to continue. Instead, they remained perfectly still. He hesitated. Then he lowered his eyes toward the firing device. Harris slowly released his breath. The suppressed crack of his rifle barely reached my ears. Half a second later, the insurgent collapsed sideways. The battery rolled from his hand. Nobody moved. 5 seconds. 10. Nothing happened. The explosives remained silent. A collective sigh filled our damaged observation post. But almost immediately, another fighter rushed toward the same position. They've got a backup. Before Harris could chamber another round, automatic fire erupted from the compound, forcing all of us back behind cover. Bullets slammed into the walls again. They're covering him! The second insurgent dove behind the concrete barrier and grabbed the firing wires. I raised my rifle. Too much dust. Too much distance. No clear shot. The convoy still couldn't move. Everyone knew what was about to happen. Then, without warning, 2 AH-64 Apache helicopters roared into the battle from the south. Their rotors echoed across the valley. Within seconds, powerful searchlights swept across the battlefield. The insurgents froze. The man holding the detonator looked up for just an instant. It was the last mistake he would ever make. A burst from the Apache's 30mm cannon ripped across the roadside, obliterating the firing position in a cloud of dust, concrete, and smoke. The command wire went dead. The ambush had just failed. But the battle was far from over. The Apache's cannon fire changed everything. For the first time since the shooting started, the insurgents lost the initiative. Their carefully planned ambush was beginning to unravel. "Enemy breaking contact," our sniper called. Not all of them. Through my optic, I watched several fighters sprint toward the northern side of the water treatment facility, while others continued firing at our building, trying to keep our heads down. "They're buying time," Harris said. "They're trying to get someone out." I followed his line of sight. Near the rear entrance of the compound, a black SUV suddenly rolled out from beneath a camouflage net stretched between two collapsed storage buildings. None of us had seen it before. "They've been hiding that vehicle all night." The SUV accelerated immediately, heading toward a narrow dirt road leading north into a maze of abandoned irrigation canals. My radio crackled. "Overwatch. Identify vehicle." Black SUV leaving the compound. High speed. Possible HVI on board. The battalion commander didn't hesitate. "Maintain visual." Easy to say. Hard to do. The SUV disappeared behind a line of damaged buildings for several seconds before reappearing farther north. Our sniper tracked it carefully. Too far for a clean shot. I know. Meanwhile, the quick reaction force had finally begun moving again. Combat engineers rolled forward first, scanning Route Copper for additional explosives, while the armored vehicles established a security perimeter. The convoy wasn't rushing anymore. They had learned exactly how close they had come to disaster. The Apache helicopters shifted their attention toward the retreating insurgents. Bright infrared beams swept across open fields as the pilots searched for anyone attempting to escape. Several fighters abandoned their weapons and scattered into nearby palm groves. Others continued running toward the canals. Then something unexpected happened. The black SUV stopped. Not because it had been hit. It stopped beside what looked like an abandoned farmhouse nearly 800 meters north of the compound. 3 men climbed out. 1 remained with the vehicle. The other 2 hurried inside the building. I focused my binoculars. One of them wore the same dark civilian clothing we'd seen earlier. The man everyone had been taking orders from. "There he is," I whispered. Harris looked through his spotting scope. "That's our guy." The battalion commander came over the radio. "Can you maintain positive observation?" "Affirmative." For almost a full minute, nothing happened. The helicopters couldn't engage. The building was too close to several civilian structures, and thermal imaging showed multiple heat signatures nearby that couldn't immediately be identified. Rules of engagement mattered. Nobody wanted innocent people caught in the middle. Then our drone operator spoke over the net. "We've got movement behind the farmhouse." Another vehicle. This one was a dusty white pickup that had been hidden inside a collapsed barn. "They planned multiple escape routes," Harris muttered. The civilian-dressed man exited the farmhouse carrying a backpack. He climbed into the pickup without hesitation. The black SUV remained where it was. A decoy. The realization hit me immediately. "They're splitting." Headquarters reached the same conclusion. "All units, stand by. Possible deception." The pickup accelerated west. The SUV turned east. Both vehicles disappeared in opposite directions. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Every decision now mattered. Follow the wrong vehicle. And the real target would vanish into the Iraqi countryside before sunrise. I studied both vehicles carefully. The SUV was moving fast. Too fast. Almost recklessly. Whoever was driving wanted attention. The pickup was different. It kept a steady speed. No sudden movements. No unnecessary turns. Almost as if it was trying not to be noticed. "Harris." "Yeah?" "If you were protecting your commander, I'd put him in the boring vehicle." I nodded. "So would I." I keyed my radio one more time. "Falcon 1. I assess the pickup as the primary escape vehicle." There was a brief silence. Then the battalion commander replied, "Copy your assessment." A second later, one of the Apache helicopters peeled away from the SUV and banked hard toward the white pickup, disappearing into the darkness. The Apache closed the distance on the white pickup in less than 30 seconds. From our position, it looked like a pair of faint infrared lights moving across the desert. Through the radio, however, we could hear every update as if we were sitting inside the cockpit. "Shadow 1 has visual." A brief pause followed. "White pickup traveling westbound along the irrigation road. Speed approximately 60 miles per hour." The battalion commander answered immediately. "Maintain surveillance only. Positive identification before engagement. That order frustrated everyone listening. The helicopter crew had the vehicle in sight. The target was escaping. But combat isn't about shooting first. Every decision has consequences, and one mistake could cost innocent lives. I never took my eyes off the thermal display. The pickup continued for another mile before slowing unexpectedly. "Why is he stopping?" Harris asked. Nobody had an answer. The truck pulled beside what appeared to be an abandoned date palm grove. 3 heat signatures climbed out. Not 2. 3. One remained near the driver's door. The other 2 disappeared beneath the trees. Our drone operator interrupted the silence. "Negative. Make that 4 heat signatures." "What?" There was already someone waiting inside the grove. So this had been another rendezvous point. The planning behind this operation was far more sophisticated than we had originally believed. The Apache pilot reported again. "Individuals are transferring equipment." I adjusted my optic as far as it would go. The resolution wasn't perfect, but I could clearly see long rectangular cases being moved from the pickup to another vehicle hidden beneath camouflage netting. Harris lowered his binoculars. "They're changing transportation." Exactly. If they abandoned the pickup, every unit chasing it would lose valuable time. The commander came back on the radio. "Can anyone identify the individual in civilian clothing?" Nobody answered immediately. Finally, the drone operator spoke. "Negative facial confirmation." That wasn't enough. Without positive identification, headquarters still couldn't authorize a strike. Seconds mattered. The hidden vehicle suddenly started. It wasn't another pickup. It was a dark-colored SUV that blended almost perfectly with the terrain. The men climbed inside one after another. Within moments, the pickup was left behind. Then something unexpected happened. The driver climbed back into the abandoned pickup and accelerated in the opposite direction. A decoy inside a decoy. Harris actually laughed. "I'll give them this. They planned for everything." The battalion commander had seen enough. "Shadow 1, continue tracking the SUV." The helicopter banked hard. For several long seconds, the aircraft disappeared behind a ridgeline. My pulse quickened. If the pilot lost visual now, we might never find that vehicle again. Then the pilot's calm voice returned. "Shadow 1 has reacquired." A wave of relief passed through everyone monitoring the operation. The SUV continued northwest, avoiding every paved road. Whoever was driving knew exactly where aerial surveillance struggled the most. Dry riverbeds, palm groves, collapsed irrigation canals, natural cover. Our intelligence officer suddenly broke into the radio net. "Taylor, go ahead. We've cross-referenced your location." I waited. "The vehicle is heading toward an abandoned industrial complex." I frowned. "We've never searched it." "No." Another pause. "Because until tonight, we didn't know it existed." That statement changed everything. This wasn't simply an escape. This was another operational site, another safe house, maybe another weapons cache, possibly an entire command network we hadn't uncovered. The battalion commander didn't waste another second. "All ground units, prepare for pursuit." Then he addressed me directly. "Sergeant Taylor." "Sir?" "You've been watching this fight from the beginning." "Yes, sir. I want your team attached to the assault element." I looked across the room at Harris. Despite the dust covering his face and the blood trickling from a small cut above his eyebrow, he grinned. "Looks like we're not done yet." I smiled for the first time that night. "No." As the first light of dawn began to appear over the Iraqi desert, we climbed out of the shattered observation post, reloaded our rifles, and headed toward the waiting armored vehicles. The longest night of the week wasn't over. It was about to become the most dangerous mission of the deployment. The convoy rolled out just after sunrise. A thin layer of dust hung over the desert, turning the early morning light into a dull orange glow. None of us had slept. The adrenaline from the firefight had long since replaced exhaustion, but I knew that feeling wouldn't last forever. Our observation post had been reduced to little more than a shell of broken concrete and twisted steel. Looking back at it as our MRAP pulled away, it was hard to believe the 6 of us had survived inside that building. Harris climbed into the seat across from me and checked the magazine in his rifle one last time. "You think they're expecting us?" I shook my head. "I think they're expecting somebody." The industrial complex was nearly 12 miles northwest of the water treatment facility. According to the intelligence section, it had once been a concrete manufacturing plant before the war. Years of neglect had left most of the buildings collapsed, making it nearly invisible from the main highway. Perfect for anyone who wanted to disappear. As we approached the area, the Apache helicopters widened their orbit overhead. "Shadow 1 to ground force," the pilot transmitted. "SUV entered the central warehouse approximately 18 minutes ago. No movement since." The battalion commander acknowledged the report. "Maintain overwatch." The convoy slowed to a crawl. Combat engineers moved first, sweeping the entrance road for pressure plates and buried explosives. Nobody wanted another surprise. After nearly 10 minutes, the signal came. "Route is clear." Our vehicles advanced through the rusted front gate one at a time. The place felt abandoned. Rusted conveyor belts stretched between enormous concrete buildings. Broken machinery sat exactly where workers had left it years earlier. Wind pushed loose sheets of metal against each other, creating an eerie metallic echo across the yard. Too quiet. I stepped out of the vehicle and scanned the rooftops. Nothing. No movement. No heat signatures. The silence bothered me more than the firefight had. Harris stopped beside me. "I don't like this." "Neither do I." The battalion commander gathered the assault teams around a faded site map that was still bolted to a concrete wall. "Our objective is the central warehouse." He pointed toward the largest building in the complex. "Drone imagery confirms the SUV entered here." He paused before continuing. "We don't know how many personnel are inside." That was enough information. We split into 2 assault elements. My team would enter through the western loading bay, while the second team approached from the eastern maintenance entrance. Simple, fast, controlled. At least, that was the plan. We advanced carefully between abandoned trucks and stacks of cracked concrete blocks. Every doorway, every broken window, every shadow became a potential threat. When we reached the loading bay, I noticed something unusual. The massive steel doors were closed, but fresh tire tracks disappeared underneath them. "They're inside," Harris nodded, "and they closed the doors after entering." That meant they had time. Time to prepare. Time to build defenses. Time to leave us another surprise. Our breacher examined the entrance. No visible wires. He checked the hinges. No secondary lock. Then he looked back at me. "Whenever you're ready." I took one slow breath. The radio was silent. Every member of the team waited for the signal. I raised 3 fingers. 3, 2, 1. The breaching charge detonated with a deafening blast. The steel doors burst inward. We flowed through the opening exactly as we had practiced hundreds of times. "Left clear. Right clear." The warehouse was enormous. Rows of abandoned equipment stretched into darkness. Dust floated through beams of sunlight breaking in from holes in the roof. For several seconds, nothing. No gunfire, no movement, no voices, just silence. Then our point man stopped. "Taylor." I moved beside him. In the center of the warehouse stood the black SUV. Its engine was cold. Every door was open, completely empty. No driver, no passengers, nothing. Harris slowly looked around the warehouse. "They're gone." Before anyone could answer, a loud metallic bang echoed somewhere beneath our feet. Every head turned at once, then another, this time closer. It wasn't coming from inside the warehouse. It was coming from underground. Someone was moving beneath us.